G'day folks, welcome to this playthrough of the Grand Campaign of 1914 Serbian or Sterbien. You may have watched my earlier example of play where I played through one of the introductory scenarios which just focused on the Austro-Hungarian 5th Army's advance up in the north towards Belgrade across the Drina River. This Grand Campaign also adds the Austro-Hungarian 6th Army down in the south, and they advance near the Montenegrin border towards some objectives in the mountains. A very different situation in the south here. Supply is more difficult to trace through the mountains. The Austro-Hungarians are often tracing supply across these roads that weave through the mountain passes. It's more difficult to move, of course, through this mountainous terrain, again often following the roads. And of course the Serbians have the advantage of using that terrain when defending and then slowly pulling back where they need to, away from the Austrians. Now on this map I've highlighted the 5th Army's objectives with yellow markers. You can see them kind of in the middle of the map there, 2 objectives, and the 6th Army with green markers. 2 of them are very visible down on the border of Montenegro. One of them is under a Serbian unit, sort of in the centre south of the map. Now, in contrast to that first scenario that I played earlier, things went very differently for the Austrians in this playthrough. In that first scenario, the opening scenario, I'd been very cautious with the Austrians, advancing very slowly, trying to choose my battles carefully. In this one, they really rushed across the Drina as fast as they can. And they had some great successes in combat. They eliminated a Serbian asset quite quickly. They quite heavily reduced the combat effectiveness of the Loznica brigade up in the northwest, which has already severely weakened that Serbian frontier. In the south, they are very, again, these mountain costs are quite prohibitive. Using the roads takes 3 movement points. So they're advancing very slowly towards the Serbian and Montenegrin units on the frontier. It's just a very slow plod through the mountains at this stage. The second turn of the game, which is on the game turn track, effectively game turn 1, continues much the same for the Austrians up in the north. They again continue to drive that Loznica brigade back. The 13th Corps is really focused on driving through that little valley between the Chur Mountains and that Drina River to the south. Whilst up in the north, the 8th Corps has already captured the Chur Mountain and are driving quite well against the Serbians. They've captured Sabac in the north. Now you may recall from that earlier scenario that I played, the Serbians held Sabac and caused the Austrians a lot of pain as they tried to secure the town on the Sava River, which they were never able to do. In this case, they've rushed across the Sava, established a pontoon bridge up in the top right, and have captured Sabac quite early on, which just takes, with the combination of that and the Chur Mountain in the southwest, it relieves a lot of the pressure here. There's a lot of open terrain in this area, which really suits the Austrians, who are numerically superior at this stage. Now in the south, again, this slow advance through the mountains continues. The Herzegovinian, the Montenegrin units pull back in the south they're really choosing some decent defensive paths along those roads in the high mountain terrain where they get a good defensive bonus, and the same slightly in the northeast with those Serbian units on the frontier. Now by game turn 2, some Serbian reinforcements have arrived around Sabac and the Chur Mountain, just to the east of those locations, and they've secured the front line a little bit, slowing down the Austro-Hungarian advance. There's a lot of back and forth fighting along the lines up in the north, where the 8th Corps is. You can see the 29th Division has attached itself to the 8th Corps here. So they're working together to try to push the Serbians away from Sabac. They're right in the outskirts of town there. But in the fighting that's really been going on here, the Serbians are getting the upper hand, and they're really reducing the combat effectiveness of these Austrian units. Some of these are down to combat ineffective. I think the 21st Division has been reduced to combat ineffective status as a result of that last combat on this turn. Slightly to the south, the 13th Corps just pushes some of those Serbian assets out of the mountains to threaten that Serbian southern flank. There are two weak Serbian assets there. You can see the Loznica brigade has pulled back and have recovered one step of combat effectiveness. And yeah, this will enable the Austro-Hungarians to push a little bit more through the mountains near the Drina in that area. Now, in the south, the 16th Corps having some surprising successes in the mountains against these Montenegrin units. They are getting some lucky retreat results and have eliminated one Montenegrin asset. Elsewhere, just around the 15th Corps in the north of that area, they are just manoeuvring very carefully through these mountains to try and get the best combat attacks. Again, because of the objective requirements, they have to push to the east, but they can do so sort of, you can see around the north there of the 15th Corps area, they're kind of trying to push through the mountains to outflank some of those Serbian defenders. They're also, on this last term, moving slowly because they're waiting for the 16th Corps in the south to push through. They're hoping that if the 16th Corps can push through, capture their objective or get close to it, they may even be able to provide some support for their attacks in the north.
Okay, so by game turn 3, things are going very well for the Austro-Hungarians in the south. They're pushing the Montenegrins back through the mountains. The Montenegrins are trying to pull back away from disadvantageous combat situations, but they've made some bad decisions, and this is opening some gaps for the Austro-Hungarians to move through those mountains and towards that green objective in the south. This is then also placing pressure on the Serbians just slightly to the north, because they risk having their supplies cut off, and so they're also having to pull back in that northern area. In the far north, though, with the 5th Army, it's a very different story for the Austro-Hungarians. They have had to cancel their strategic plans. They've lost 15 victory points for that because of their failure to advance really anywhere near their objectives. But this gives them some flexibility to manoeuvre a little more, and so they're using that to shift between sort of the north and the south of this region, trying to pick off the weaker Serbian defenders. The problem now is that the Serbians are quite strong, and although the Austro-Hungarians have captured the Cher Mountain and Sebak, they have lost some combat effectiveness in the process, and through a series of pretty good Serbian counterattacks, the Austrians are now having to pull back in this area to enable some of their divisions to recover their combat effectiveness levels. So some early successes in this region for the Austro-Hungarian 5th Army, but now the tide is turning and the Austrians are, the Serbians are hitting back quite hard and hurting the Austro-Hungarian ability to fight effectively. Okay, so just after game turn 3, there is the interphase where both sides have received some replacements, but because there have been relatively few strength losses across the map, most of these go to the resources track. I do miss one or two, which I'll fix up in just a moment, but there's only been a couple of strength reductions thus far. Now, in the north, again, you can see the Austro-Hungarian 13th Corps manoeuvring between the north and the south, trying to pick off those Serbian defenders, as I said, but not having much success. Instead, it is these Serbian counterattacks that are really reducing those combat effectiveness levels of the Austro-Hungarians, and you can see some of the 8th Corps in the north have really been retreated away from the lines. You can see two of the divisions up in the northwest recovering combat effectiveness levels. One of them had reached demoralisation status. And there is quite a strong line of Serbian units just south of Serbia and just east of the Cher Mountain in the centre of the image there. Now in the south, this is where the Austro-Hungarians are really having their success. They have captured their objective. That little green marker has been bumped, but they've captured their objective in the south. They've really cornered the Montenegrins on the bottom of the map there, and this is giving them some options to move through these mountains and surround the Serbians of that Uzici group in the north of this region. And you can see one of the Serbian brigades has been reduced. The Austro-Hungarian combats are just doing better in this region compared to in the north. They're rolling better down here than what they are up in the north. So they're making good progress in the mountains. Slow and steady, but they are weakening the Serbians as they advance. Okay, game turn 5 sees the start of a strong Serbian counteroffensive up the north alongside the Sava River. They are pushing hard against those already reduced Austro-Hungarian units of the 9th Corps, but it's a very different story down the south. Down in the very southern end of the map, the Montenegrin units just are struggling to defend. They are driven off the map in the far south, and that 16th Corps of the Austro-Hungarian army is again just pushing slowly towards the east through the mountains. Slightly to the north, the 15th Corps is really manoeuvring between along these roads to effectively outmaneuver these Serbian units, and they're picking their targets and attacking in strength. Further north in that northern sector, around the 5th Army, 13th Corps is effectively trying to drive a wedge between the Serbian units, forcing these Serbian units out of the valley and into the hills. Now, the final key development of this turn was the Serbian capture of Savac in the north. Part of that big counteroffensive was a huge attack that they launched on, I think it was the 21st Division of that 5th Army. And they had a great success driving the defenders away. I think they are now certainly combat ineffective. They may even be demoralised at this state. But Serbians have recaptured Savac in the north, and this 5th Army is quite battered. 13th Corps in the south still in good shape, but up in the north there around Savac and Mount Sher, the Austro-Hungarians are not in good shape. Game turn 6 sees the Austro-Hungarian army continuing to drive the Montenegrins away from those objectives in the south. And now that 16th Corps has advanced, they've met up with the 15th Corps, and they're really beginning that drive. They're about to shift around to the north. You can see not many Montenegrin units left, and a lot of Serbian units in the area now reduced as well from that Uzici group. Now, further to the north, 13th Corps struggled to make any advance this turn, butting their heads against the Serbians in that hilly terrain. But further to the north, the Serbians are really driving north and northwest of Savac, and they are really hurting that 21st Division of Austro-Hungarian Army, 5th Army. That division is now demoralised, and they are being driven back from combat. So the Serbian 2nd Corps is really dominating this northern area, and they're now considering crossing the Sava River to the northeast. Thinking about it, not sure what to do yet, whether to drive across the river or to continue to harass and push those remaining units of the 8th Corps away to the northwest and towards the Drina, indeed. So we'll see what happens. Well, things slowed down a little bit for the Austro-Hungarians in the south on game turn 7. The Serbians once again pulling away from disadvantageous combat whenever they can, not wanting to fight the Austro-Hungarians in the south, trying to pick decent defensive terrain, but just being surrounded and often trapped and caught, and a lot of those small assets being picked off and eliminated. In the north, the Austro-Hungarian 29th Corps has been forced to cross the Sava River just to get away from those Serbian units that were harassing them. They are completely demoralised. They're on demoralisation level 2. And they've crossed the Sava, pulled back, and we see some other members of the 8th Corps rejoining the line, having recovered some combat effectiveness to try and slow down that Serbian advance. But as I said, Serbians have destroyed the pontoon bridge over the Sava, and they're considering constructing their own to try and get some forces and move into Austro-Hungarian territory, which could be very interesting. Well, following the success in the north, the Second Corps of the Serbian armies has really struggled to kind of caught in this difficult area. It's difficult to cross the Sava and then maintain an offensive. At the same time, the moving of these Austro-Hungarian units in the west has just slowed down their assault. The 29th Division of the Austro-Hungarian army did retreat back across the river, which gives the Serbians some breathing space here, but it's not quite enough space to maintain a strong offensive in the area. They've also moved a division down to the south because things aren't going well down the mountains against the Austro-Hungarian 6th Army. They've moved an entire division down there and it's starting to follow the roads trickling down to the south to try and reinforce that situation. Now, the 13th Corps of the Austro-Hungarian 5th Army also had a success this turn. They did a lot of damage to that Loznica brigade just in the southern end of this sector, pushed them away from that road. And again, are trying to separate those forces. You can see the Timok 2 division just in the north there, and that Loznica brigade with the orange dot in the south. Now, these forces in the south, just near the 13th Corps there, are relatively weak, so there's some good opportunities for the Austro-Hungarians to swing around through this valley area if they can get just one or two more good successes. They've also been helped, as I said, by that removal, the transfer of that Serbian division to the south. So they're putting a lot of pressure in this central area here. It'll be interesting to see how this develops. And in the far south, it's the same story. The Austro-Hungarian 16th Corps driving away the Montenegrins, but the Serbians putting up a bit of a fight. You can see on that road to the north there. They have momentarily slowed down the Austro-Hungarians, but the important thing here is that the Austro-Hungarian 16th Corps have secured those objectives. So their offensive has effectively succeeded, and they are on a good track here to begin to shift around to the northeast and the north and support the 15th Corps in their drive east. Okay, as we enter game turn 9, it really is a bit of a mixed bag all across the field. Way down in the south, you can see the 16th Corps of the Austro-Hungarian 6th Army have driven the Montenegrins off the map once again. They are in their off-map boxes and will have to re-enter further to the east. This frees up that 16th Corps to begin to drive north, and they're pushing with elements of the 15th Corps that have been just shifted over to the 16th Corps temporarily to help drive the Serbians up to the north away from the hills. The Serbian reinforcements have arrived in the area and they are helping to kind of stabilise the position, but there's some pretty good combat results for the Austro-Hungarians in the 15th Corps as well. They launched a pretty low odds attack just in the north of that sector and were successful driving the Serbians back off that high mountainous terrain into the low mountains. Now, further in the north with the Austro-Hungarian 5th Army, the Serbians took the last turn just to take a rest and think about their situation, and then this turn they've decided to put the pressure back on, and they're just launching attacks against those reduced units, the less combat effective units of the Austro-Hungarian 8th Corps way up in the north near the Sava River. So they first put themselves in a position to strike in any direction really. They isolated and eliminated an Austro-Hungarian asset, which opened a path through to their supply train, and then the Austrians had to rush to recover and close that gap. And that presented another opportunity for the Serbians to strike in the north. And they did so, and they had a minor success, causing a combat effective reduction on one of those units. Elsewhere, things were pretty static. The 13th Corps once again had some success down in the south, driving the Serbians off the hills or back to the southeast once again. And they're getting closer to those Serbian supply sources. It's also stretching out this Serbian line as well. You can see now that the Serbians really in a long line from the north of the Sava River way into those mountains in the south. So they're going to have to watch out as well. Both lines are looking quite thin and vulnerable in many places of this northern sector. So we're just heading into the third interphase. There'll be replacements and another victory point adjustment for Austro-Hungarian progress into Serbia, which at this stage has been pushed back from what it was before. So it'll be, I think, a victory point reduction at this stage.